Reborn to the day my brother brought back a female physician. This time, my entire family could hear my inner thoughts. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. The cold winter wind seeped through the cracks in the carved window panes. I pulled my heavy fox fur robe tighter around me. My fingertips were slightly numb. The face in the bronze mirror was youthful and radiant. It was me at 16, untouched by the bloodshed of the battlefield and having never tasted the bitterness of exile. I slowly raised my hand and ran it over the corner of my eye, making sure there was no scar left there from despair. In my past life, I died in a freezing dungeon. That day, too, was a winter day with light snowflakes drifting through the air. I watched my family fall apart because of that woman. I watched my beloved older brother fall in battle, his body left without a trace. And in the end, I could only breathe my last breath alone in the cold wind. Now, I'm back to this day once again. Zhilan, what are you standing there daydreaming about? Hurry up and come with me to the front hall. Your brother has brought the guest home. Mrs. Ching, dressed in a deep purple brocade robe adorned with cloud patterns, pushed open the door with a beaming smile. She was also holding a brand new brocade cloak, a welcome gift intended for that distinguished guest. I suppressed the cold glint in my eyes, steadied my breathing, and stood up calmly. Mother, who is this person my brother brought home? Why has he caused you so much trouble? My tone was calm. I didn't let even a hint of unnecessary emotion show. Ms. Ching smiled as she draped the cloak over her arm, her eyes brimming with satisfaction. I heard from your brother that she's a female physician he rescued in Yunzhou named Qiao Yue. Though she comes from a humble background, she possesses extraordinary medical skills and has a kind and gentle nature. She's quite endearing. A female doctor? I mulled over those two words, and a cold smile crossed my mind. In my past life, I, too, thought she was a kind-hearted woman, until she gradually climbed her way to the position of imperial consort, and until, in order to solidify her status, she used the Wei family as a stepping stone and pushed my entire family into the abyss. Let's go. Don't keep my brother waiting. I replied softly and stepped out of the room. As I walked through the colonnade, the winter plum blossoms in the courtyard were in full bloom, yet their crisp, cool fragrance could not mask the faint whiff of scheming lingering in the air. In the front hall, the brazier was burning brightly. Wei Zhilan was standing beside the seat of honor, his posture as upright as a pine tree. The look he cast at the woman beside him held a tenderness I had never seen before. The woman was dressed in a simple, elegant blue tunic and skirt. She had a slender figure, and her eyes and brows betrayed a vivacity and stubbornness rarely seen in women of that era. Standing beside Wei Zhilan, she kept her eyes downcast and appeared gentle and vulnerable. She was none other than Qiao Yue. Zhilan, come here quickly. When Wei Zhilan saw me, his eyes lit up. He strode over and ruffled my hair. This is Qiao Yue. Thanks to her devoted care in Yunzhou, I, your older brother, would have met my end there otherwise. She's a remarkable woman. Not only is she well versed in pharmacology, but she also knows a thing or two about Qimendunjia. From now on, you should learn as much as you can from her. I raised my head slightly, my gaze resting calmly on Qiao Yue's face. She looked up as well. Her eyes were crystal clear, and the corners of her mouth held a hint of timidity that was just right. Miss Zhilan, I look forward to your continued support. Her voice was soft and sweet, with a hint of a coquettish tone she had clearly practiced. I didn't speak right away. I just quietly studied her. I know this face all too well, so well that I can see right through the malice hidden behind every subtle expression. But at that moment, my expression remained impassive. I simply bowed slightly, my manners so impeccable that there was nothing to fault. The person my brother rescued is, of course, an honored guest of the Wei household. Miss Qiao, there's no need to be so formal. Everyone in the household will treat you well. Wei Zhilan was clearly pleased with my attitude. He had his arm around Qiao Yue's shoulder and was laughing heartily. That's right, I knew Zhilan would be the most sensible. I lowered my gaze to hide that fleeting chill. Just then, Qiao Yue turned slightly to the side and, looking a bit self-conscious, tugged at Wei Jinghuan's sleeve. General, I do not seek wealth or status. I only hope to have a place to call home. If I can repay you for saving my life, I will be content. She spoke these words very softly, her voice trembling, and Wei Jinghuan's heart was filled with tenderness. I stood quietly to one side, silently counting in my heart. 1, 2, 3. Just as I expected, I heard a series of hurried footsteps outside the door. Father Wei Yan strode in through the door, still wearing his court robes. His brow was furrowed, as if he had encountered some thorny issue in the imperial court. However, when he saw the gentle and charming Qiao Yue in the hall, his steps faltered slightly. Is this the female doctor who saved your brother? Wei Yan's piercing gaze swept over Qiao Yue. Qiao Yue immediately knelt, her posture proper and elegant. It was a form of greeting I had never seen before, one that conveyed both deference and a spirit distinct from that of ordinary women. I am Qiao Yue, a commoner. I pay my respects to Lord Wei. As I watched her kneel, I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. What a clever move, playing hard to get. Now, her father is sure to see her in a new light, and from this point on, the gates of the Wei family will be wide open to her. Meanwhile, her blood-sucking vines will gradually wrap themselves around the necks of every member of the Wei household. As expected, Wei Yan looked slightly surprised and reached out to offer a symbolic gesture of support. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Since you saved Jinghuan, you are now a guest of honor in the Wei household. While you're here, just treat this place as your own home. He turned his head and looked at me and my mother. Ms. Jing, you'll have to work a little harder these next few days to prepare a tasteful courtyard for Miss Qiao. You mustn't neglect this in any way. Don't worry, sir. I've already taken care of everything. It's right next to Zhilan's moon-viewing pavilion, that way, the two sisters can spend more time together. Mrs. Jing smiled with a look of tenderness on her face. My gaze lingered on Qiao Yue's face for a moment. Just then, she raised her head slightly, and a hint of cunning flashed in the depths of her eyes, which held a hint of ambition. I thought to myself, since heaven has given me a second chance at life, how could I just stand by and watch her turn this mansion upside down? In this lifetime, I not only intend to live a long life, but also to be the one holding the pieces in this game of chess. I turned around and handed Qiao Yue the cup of steaming clear tea. Miss Qiao, please have some tea. Qiao Yue accepted it, clearly flattered. The moment her fingertips touched the rim of the cup, a hint of scrutiny flashed in her gaze as she looked at me, but I merely gave a faint smile, said nothing more, and turned to look at Wei Jinghuan. Brother, the flu has been rampant in the city lately. Since Miss Qiao knows medicine, why don't we ask her to visit the soup kitchen on the outskirts of town tomorrow? I lifted the teacup, my fingertips gently caressing the smooth white porcelain. This rebirth was like a thin cicada wing, stretching between me and the world, transparent yet indestructible. Everyone thought I was that spoiled young lady from the Wei family, completely unaware of the raging storm churning beneath that calm exterior. Go to the soup kitchen? Qiao Yue's lively eyes flickered. She seemed a bit hesitant, yet also flattered. I'm not very knowledgeable, and I'm afraid I might hinder the general's important mission. As she spoke, she quietly glanced up to gauge Wei Jinghuan's reaction. That look of helpless vulnerability and desperate restraint was truly executed to perfection. Before Wei Jinghuan could speak, the impatient Mrs. Jing laughed first. What's the big deal? Zhilan means well. Since she knows medicine, helping the common people is a way to accumulate merit. That's right, Miss Qiao, I said as I set the teacup back on the table. The porcelain clinked with a faint yet clear sound that echoed through the quiet hall. My brother often teaches me that a doctor must have a compassionate heart. Since you possess such skills, Miss Qiao, now is the perfect time, as the new year approaches, to do more good deeds, and to bring even greater honor to the Wei family. I spoke politely, but between the lines, I was placing her on a pedestal. Doesn't she want to use the Wei family to climb the social ladder? Then I'll start by shackling her with the chains of benevolence and righteousness. Wei Jinghuan laughed heartily and clapped his hands. Zhilan is right. I'll go with you tomorrow. There have been quite a few displaced people on the outskirts of the city lately, and with you there, I'll have peace of mind. A fleeting, barely perceptible shadow of gloom crossed Qiao Yue's eyes, but it vanished in an instant, and she quickly resumed her expression of tearful gratitude. Thank you, General Wei, and thank you for your kindness, Miss Qiao Yue will certainly do her very best. The banquet began shortly thereafter, with the table laden with food and wine. Qiao Yue sat in the seat closest to Wei Jinghuan. Though she declined several times during the meal, she eventually drank a few cups of warm wine at Wei Jinghuan's persistent urging, and a faint blush spread across her cheeks, making her look even more charming. This wine is this year's new batch of osmanthus. It has a sweet taste, please try some, young lady, Ms. Ching said kindly. Qiao Yue lifted her glass, took a small sip, suddenly furrowed her brow, set the glass down, and remarked thoughtfully, actually, if you add some rock sugar and dried tangerine peel when making wine, it will have a cleaner, crisper taste and can also soothe the lungs and relieve coughs. If you add a little more. She paused, her eyes darting about as if she'd suddenly realized she'd said too much. She quickly lowered her head. I overstepped my bounds, General. Please don't hold it against me, I just used to tinker with these little trinkets with my father back home. Upon hearing this, Wei Jinghuan's eyes lit up. Is there really such a remarkable method? Miss Qiao, you truly are well read. I sat in a seat of lower rank, quietly watching her performance. These so-called novel insights were nothing more than a ploy to attract attention. Claims about moistening the lungs and relieving coughs and layers of flavor, in the eyes of the people of this era, they were indeed shocking and outlandish notions. Her father, Wei Yan, also put down his chopsticks and looked at Qiao Yue with great interest, clearly impressed by her wild ideas. I nonchalantly picked up a bite of food with my chopsticks, but inwardly I was thinking, if she really did add dried tangerine peel, it would clash with the wine's character, and drinking too much of it could actually cause stomachaches. Even in this life, she still hasn't managed to shake this habit of showing off. This dried tangerine peel really is a wonderful thing, I said, setting down my chopsticks and looking at Qiao Yue with a half smile. But I've heard that dried tangerine peel has a drying nature, and consuming too much of it can actually damage the stomach. I wonder, Miss Qiao, have you ever seen anyone at home who, in their craving for this cool, refreshing taste, ended up with an intestinal abscess? For a moment, the atmosphere in the room grew tense. Qiao Yue's expression froze for a moment. She hadn't expected me to contradict her. Though that moment of stiffness was fleeting, I still caught it. You're right, miss, she said with a forced smile, but out of the corner of her eye she looked to Wei Jinghuan for help. I was being too naive. All right, all right. Today is a family gathering, let's not bring up such disheartening topics. Wei Yan waved his hand and turned to look at Wei Jinghuan. Jinghuan, the imperial plum blossom banquet is in 2 days. Since this Miss Qiao also understands medicine, why not take her along so she can see what the world is like? Wei Jinghuan gladly agreed, father is right. Yue, what do you think? As soon as the words Yue were spoken, the hall fell silent. Wei Jinghuan paused for a moment, seemingly realizing he had said something he shouldn't have, and scratched his head awkwardly. Qiao Yue lowered her head, looking incredibly shy, yet she couldn't hide the wild joy welling up in her eyes. I watched the scene with a cold gaze, the flame in my heart burning ever more fiercely. They were all lost in this haven of sensual pleasure, unaware of how deep the abyss lurking behind this woman truly was. I turned to look out the window. The night was deep and dark, and snowflakes were falling thick and fast, as if they were the ashes of that great fire from a past life. Brother, I said suddenly, interrupting their laughter and merriment, since we're going to the plum blossom banquet, shouldn't we ask one of the palace matrons to review Miss Qiao's etiquette and manners? After all, she's representing the Wei family's reputation. If something goes wrong in front of the noble lady, the Wei family. Zhilan is right, Mother Jing immediately interjected, her expression grave. This is indeed no matter to be taken lightly. Miss Qiao, I'll find you a strict governess. You'll have to put up with a bit of hardship these next few days. Qiao Yue's smile froze completely on her lips. She wanted to refuse, but under the gaze of her father and brother, she could only grit her teeth and nod. The look of deep resentment on her face truly made anyone watching think she was being deliberately difficult. But I have no intention of giving up just yet. Aside from etiquette, there's another important matter. Since she's now living at the Wei residence, should we also thoroughly inspect the medical texts and herbs she brought with her? The voice of my heart echoed inside my chest, but I never expected it to be so loud. I can't believe something like this was hidden among these pages. My father, Wei Yan, suddenly stopped mid-stroke with his chopsticks. His brow furrowed deeply, as if he had just heard some incredible secret, and his gaze snapped toward me. Mrs. Chang's hand trembled as she held the teacup, spilling tea onto the hem of her skirt, but she didn't even notice. She just stared at the box filled with medicinal herbs with a look of terror on her face. I sat in my chair, maintaining my dignified and composed demeanor on the surface, while my mind raced through various possibilities. If I told them that an unfinished secret recipe was actually hidden at the bottom of that box, would they believe me? My father suddenly stood up and fixed Qiao Yue with a piercing gaze. Miss Qiao, there are a few things I'd like to clarify. Could you please show us the medical books you're carrying? Qiao Yue was holding a wine glass when she heard this. Her hand jerked suddenly, and the glass fell straight to the ground with a sharp crack. She jerked her head up, her eyes flashing with a hint of incredulous panic, as if a corner of some secret had been completely torn away. Lord Wei, these are just ordinary medical texts. Why make such a fuss? According to the Wei household's rules, items of unknown origin are not permitted in the study. Wei Yan's voice was steady and firm, carrying an air of unquestionable authority. Qiao Yue instinctively ducked behind Wei Jinghuan. That pleading gesture seemed particularly jarring at that very moment. Wei Jinghuan looked troubled. Father, isn't that a bit too harsh? I slowly stood up and gave my father a slight bow, my gaze clear and resolute, though in my heart I had already thoroughly analyzed every one of Qiao Yue's future schemes. Brother, father is just looking out for the family's best interests. If Miss Qiao has nothing to hide, she has nothing to fear. It's just a few medical books, why get so worked up? The candlelight in the study flickered on and off, casting the group's shadows in twisted, eerie patterns. I stood quietly to the side, my gaze sweeping over that heavy rosewood chest, and the chill in my heart grew ever more distinct. In my past life, this chest ultimately became the key that unlocked the gates of hell for the Wei family. Far from containing medical knowledge to heal the world, it was clearly a diabolical scheme Qiao Yue used to curry favor with the powerful and poison others to gain credit. I said nothing more, but simply lowered my eyes in silence. In this lifetime, no one knew that an alarm was ringing in my mind, a voice so calm it bordered on indifference, meticulously piecing together, word for word, the list of poisons hidden in Qiao Yue's trunk. My father, Wei Yan, took a deeper breath. He didn't look at me, but a barely perceptible flash of surprise crossed his eyes. He seemed to have heard something, a kind of uncanny sensitivity that defied common sense, and he suddenly turned to look at Qiao Yue, the tenderness in his eyes instantly replaced by a scrutinizing gaze. Bring it here, Wei Yan said, pointing at the box in a tone that brooked no argument. Qiao Yue's fingertips had turned white as she clutched her sleeve tightly, her body trembling slightly. Lord Wei, these volumes contain the secret remedies passed down through my family, the Qiaos. Since it's a family heirloom, all the more reason for me, Wei, to take a look at it, to make sure there aren't any toxic medicines that might harm the people in this household. No sooner had she finished speaking than Mrs. Jing also set down her teacup. Her brows were deeply furrowed, as if some invisible force had tugged at her heartstrings. Her gaze swept back and forth over Qiao Yue, and her protective instinct gradually cooled, replaced by a hint of wariness. Yue, since father wants to see it, you might as well bring it out. Although Wei Zhilan was protecting Qiao Yue, seeing his father's grim expression, he didn't dare to stop her forcefully and could only give Qiao Yue a reassuring look. Qiao Yue bit her lower lip. Her pitiful expression seemed particularly fragile at that moment. She slowly crouched down and reached for the lock on the box. The movement was so slow it felt like torture. I watched her trembling back and snorted inwardly. In my father's eyes, every moment of delay now served as irrefutable proof of my guilt. The lid of the box was lifted, revealing the bottles and jars inside, along with several yellow booklets. My father stepped forward, reached out, and opened the top one. When he saw the recipes marked with strange symbols along the edges of the pages, his already stern face suddenly turned ashen. "What is this?" Wei Yan asked in a low voice, his tone laced with suppressed anger. Qiao Yu's heart skipped a beat, but she put on a brave face. "This is just something I jotted down on the fly to help with the development of a wound-healing remedy." "Jot it down?" I took a step forward and, by candlelight, pointed to one of the pages containing the prescription. "The doses of Qiao Wu and Ma Qianzi here are extremely high. Miss Qiao, if I recall correctly, when these two are used together, even in very small doses, they're enough to cause paralysis of the limbs, or even..." My words fell like ice cubes hitting the ground, striking the very core of everyone present. The look of shock in my father Wei Yan's eyes as he looked at me revealed that this was the first time he had realized his usually gentle daughter was so well versed in such underhanded tactics. But he quickly concealed his surprise and snapped, "Miss Qiao, you'd better tell us the truth. Not just anyone is allowed to enter the Wei residence." Qiao Yue looked up. Her eyes, usually so clear, were now filled with fear and confusion. She couldn't understand why, at that very moment, everyone seemed to have suddenly come to their senses, staring intently at her every move as if she were some kind of monster. She turned her gaze toward Wei Zhilan, her eyes brimming with tears. "General, I truly was only trying to save someone." Wei Zhilan opened his mouth, but when he saw the fury on his father's face, he forced himself to swallow the words he had been about to say in her defense. "My mother, Mrs. Qing, stood up and walked quickly over to me. Her slightly cool hand rested gently on the back of my hand, as if to confirm something. The look in her eyes as she gazed at Qiao Yue no longer held the initial joy. Instead, it was tinged with a complex sense of wariness. It was a kind of intuition, the keen insight characteristic of a family leader, and it was this sensitivity that I had nurtured step by step. "You don't need to go to the soup kitchen tomorrow." Wei Yan flicked his sleeve and tossed the medical text directly onto the desk with a sharp thud. "Stay in the side courtyard for the next few days. You're not allowed to go anywhere until you've explained these prescriptions clearly." Qiao Yue felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. She froze in her tracks. She'd gone to great lengths to gain entry into the Wei family's estate. If she were confined to a side courtyard, not only would she miss her chance to curry favor with the powerful, but it would also cause the Wei family to harbor resentment toward her. She was about to say something else, but when she looked up and met my gaze, my utterly cold smile sent a shiver through her, and all her excuses got stuck in her throat like thorns. I turned around, bowed to my father, and said in a soft yet firm voice, "Father, I'm concerned that keeping those herbs in the room might pose a risk. Perhaps we should have the estate's apothecary take inventory of them again, so that Miss Qiao can rest assured and focus on her recovery." This move cut off her supply from the source, blocking all her avenues for underhanded schemes. Wei Yan gave me an approving look, then turned to give instructions to the butler. Qiao Yue watched helplessly as the servants carried the chest away. Her face was as ashen as dirt, yet she could do nothing but watch as I led the others away. Late at night, I returned to my bedchamber. Outside the window, the wind and snow were even fiercer. I pushed open the window and felt the bone-chilling cold, yet my heart remained completely unmoved. This is just the beginning. The real game has only just begun behind the scenes. Early the next morning, a servant from the mansion hurried over and knocked on the door, looking flustered. "Miss, there's been an incident." The butler stood waiting under the eaves, his hands ice-cold, his voice betraying an unmistakable panic. "Last night, Miss Qiao was crying and making a scene in the side courtyard, saying she couldn't stomach the food here at our estate. Just a moment ago, she actually fainted. The doctor we called said she'd been poisoned." I tied the sash of my cloak, giving it a light tug with my fingertips. My movements were so steady they bordered on coldness. "Poisoned?" I turned my head to glance at the butler, a faint smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "If you're a female physician, how come you didn't even realize you'd been poisoned?" The butler paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, "The doctor said the poison is extremely subtle. It was hidden in the morning dew we drink every day." Right now, the maidservants in Miss Qiao's quarters are making a fuss, claiming that someone in our household intentionally poisoned her. I stepped out of the colonnade, and the tips of my shoes crunched softly on the scattered snow. "Let's go check it out." In the side courtyard, the air was thick with the pungent smell of medicine, mixed with the bitterness of that so-called miracle cure, which stung my nose. Wei Zhilan was standing with his hands behind his back by the window, his brows furrowed into a shape. When he saw me enter, his face, filled with anxiety, froze for a moment. He clearly hadn't expected me to come. Qiao Yue lay on the bed, her face pale, with a trace of purplish-black color lingering at the corners of her lips. Her performance as someone clinging to life by a thread was truly convincing. "Brother, how is Miss Qiao doing?" I stepped forward and asked the question through the brocade curtain. Wei Zhilan turned around, a hint of irritation in his voice. "The doctor said the poison isn't particularly potent, but it's extremely rare. Zhilan, don't come over here, be careful not to catch the illness." "I'm not afraid." I walked around the screen and approached the bed. Qiao Yue had her eyes closed, but her eyelashes were trembling ever so slightly. I knew she wasn't unconscious, she was just waiting for the flames to reach me. In my past life, she'd used this very tactic. First, she poisoned herself, then she framed me, who was in charge of the household's meals at the time, leaving me unable to defend myself before my father and causing me to lose the family's trust completely. I lowered my head, staring at her bluish fingertips, and spoke slowly. "This poison is called sensitive plant. It activates upon contact with water. Though its odor is extremely faint, it can create the illusion of stomach cramps. Brother, since you've honed your keen eyesight on the battlefield, why don't you take a look and see who actually planted this poison?" Wei Zhilan suddenly looked up, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. Without waiting for his reply, I turned directly to the maid kneeling on the ground, my tone cold. The charcoal fire and morning dew in this side courtyard have always been tended by this maidservant. Since she was poisoned, the source of the poison must be somewhere close to her. "Search her. If you don't find any poison powder, then I'll have wronged her." The maid's body visibly shuddered, and her panic was laid bare in that instant. Wei Zhilan was incredibly perceptive. He instantly sensed something was amiss. With a sweep of his long arm, he barked in a deep voice, "Search." The maidservant screamed as she tried to stop him, but a guard standing behind Wei Zhilan grabbed her and pinned her down. Moments later, a small packet of dark purple powder, not yet fully used, was found deep inside her sleeve. Wei Zhilan looked at the packet of powder, and his pupils contracted sharply. He looked at Qiao Yue on the couch. The look of concern in his eyes vanished completely the moment he saw the packet of poison. I stood quietly to the side, watching the drama unfold exactly as I had hoped. "Miss Qiao, this thing. How do you explain it?" Wei Zhilan's voice was as cold as ice, with not a trace of yesterday's tenderness remaining. Qiao Yue, lying on the bed, slowly opened her eyes. A single tear rolled down the corner of her eye at just the right moment. Had this been in the past, that pitiful expression would surely have softened Wei Zhilan's heart, but now, he had already heeded the warning from the deepest recesses of his heart. She was nothing but a source of trouble. She opened her mouth, her voice hoarse. "General, this. Someone is framing me." "A frame-up?" I replied calmly. "In the Wei residence, who else besides this maidservant could get close to your Chenlu? Unless..." I paused deliberately and looked out the window. "Unless, of course, you were the one who put the poison there in the first place, in order to frame someone in this household." Wei Jinghuan's back went rigid, and his gaze shifted back and forth between me and Qiao Yue. Just then, a series of heavy footsteps sounded from outside the door, and Father Wei Yan, accompanied by the chief bodyguard, strode into the room. "There's no need to search," Wei Yan said coldly, looking at the poisonous powder in the maidservant's hand. "We just interrogated the cook here at the mansion. The place where this maidservant bought the poison was none other than the black market in the eastern part of the city." He looked at Qiao Yue. There was not a trace of tenderness left in his gaze, only cold, utter loathing. "Miss Qiao, that was quite a move. To pull off a ploy like that right under this old man's nose?" The color drained completely from Qiao Yue's pale face. She struggled to sit up, wanting to defend herself, but saw Wei Jinghuan silently step back, yielding that imposing presence entirely to his father. I lowered my gaze to the shards on the ground, feeling not the slightest bit of joy, for I could hear a tremor in my father's voice, the regret he felt upon realizing he had let the wolf into his own home. And this outburst of emotion was precisely the timing I needed. I suddenly remembered something else, turned to look at the butler, and said casually, "By the way, when I passed by the storeroom a moment ago, I thought I saw someone trying to burn those boxes Miss Qiao brought. I wonder if they were trying to destroy some evidence." The thick scent of medicine in the air was swept away by the biting cold wind, bringing with it an air of grim foreboding. I stood silently beside the screen, my fingertips gently twisting the cuff of my sleeve. Having been reborn, I buried the agony of my clan's annihilation so deeply that even my personal maid could not detect the dark currents in my eyes. Only when faced with one farce after another could I, without batting an eye, uproot the sources of trouble inch by inch. "Burn the evidence?" Wei Yan repeated those 4 words, his deep voice echoing through the narrow side courtyard. He turned his head, his eyes blazing with anger as he glared at Qiao Yue. Qiao Yue's face turned pale in an instant. Her hand, braced against the bed rail, twitched violently, as if something had pinned it there. She looked at the Wei family's personal guards gradually closing in around her, then at Wei Jinghuan's expression, cold as iron, and finally realized that this was no longer a game within the inner quarters that she could easily manipulate. "Lord Wei, please let me explain." Qiao Yue's voice finally betrayed genuine fear. The facade of resilience she had maintained crumbled piece by piece in that moment. "An explanation?" Wei Yan let out a cold laugh. Without looking at her, he turned around and strode toward the wooden chest that had not yet been sealed. "Steward, take everything to the front hall. Since Miss Qiao is so fond of playing the victim, let's go to the palace and ask His Majesty to judge this little drama for himself." Upon hearing the words "the palace," Qiao Yue finally lost control. She struggled to her feet, stumbled off the couch, and crawled on her knees a few steps, reaching out to grab Wei Jinghuan's robe. "General! Everything I've done was for you, and for the Wei family. The imperial court is a place of treacherous intrigue. Without me, how could the Wei family possibly survive?" Wei Jinghuan furrowed his brow and took a step back. His cold, hardened face, one he had worn on the battlefield for years, was now etched with complexity and inner conflict, but in the end, he did not help her to her feet. "For the Wei family?" I walked slowly toward her, each step light yet steady. "Is this foothold that Miss Qiao speaks of simply a way to drag the Wei family into the vortex of treason, so that you can secure a seat as a consort in that deep palace?" As soon as those words were spoken, silence fell all around. Father Wei Yanxiang seemed to have heard some incredible news. He spun around abruptly, his gaze slicing across Qiao Yue's face like a sharp blade. Qiao Yue froze, her once lively features now completely contorted. Her so-called time-traveler's confidence was casually torn apart in that moment, exposing the ugly heart within, filled with greed. "You! How could you?" Qiao Yue stared at me, her eyes filled with fear, as if she were looking at some unknown monster. I don't understand what you're saying. I bowed slightly, performing a bow so proper it was beyond reproach, my voice as calm as a mirror. All I know is that, as a member of the Wei household, one must not harbor even the slightest thought of harming His Majesty or the family. Father Wei Yan took a deep breath, and the dignified presence of a seasoned veteran finally radiated from him in full force. He did not spare Qiao Yue another glance, but simply ordered his personal guards, lock her in the dark chamber. Once we've thoroughly reviewed those prescriptions and letters tomorrow, if they contain anything treasonous, send her straight to the Ministry of Justice. Wait a moment, Father. I reached out to stop the royal guards, turned to look at Qiao Yue, and let a faint, mocking smile flicker at the corner of my eyes. Since she's so eager to enter the palace, we should take this generous gift with us to the plum blossom banquet. Wei Yan looked at me, and in those eyes, which had seen countless people over the years, there was a hint of scrutiny and approval unlike anything I had ever seen before. He seemed to realize that his delicate daughter possessed a mind far more astute than that of any man. Qiao Yue was dragged forcefully out of the side courtyard. Her desperate screams rang out especially piercingly in the quiet of the early morning. I stood under the eaves, watching her walk away. In a past life, it was with those delicate, boneless hands that she stirred up turmoil within this mansion, not only poisoning my mother's body, but also winning the Emperor's favor at the Plum Blossom Banquet with a few poems of unknown origin, luring our entire family step by step into a deadly trap. Now, the very tactics she used to take pride in have long since become a weapon in my hands. Zhilan, Wei Zhilan walked up beside me, his voice low and hoarse. Did you know all along that there was something wrong with her? I looked up at the dark cloud on the horizon, shook my head gently, and kept that gentle, serene smile on my lips. You're worrying too much, brother. I just think it's a major taboo for a doctor to harm patients instead of saving them. He looked at me for a long time, then finally sighed and didn't ask any more questions. Just as our party was about to head to the main hall, the butler rushed in, clutching an invitation sealed with the imperial court's golden lacquer. With a grave expression, he said, Master, Eunuch Li, who serves at the Emperor's side, has arrived. He says he is here to read an imperial edict ordering Miss Qiao to enter the palace immediately. Eunuch Li's high-pitched voice echoed through the corridor, bringing a chill that penetrated to the bone. He held the invitation, sealed with a gold-lacquered wax seal, aloft with both hands. The sunlight refracted off it, blinding to the point of dizziness. I lowered my gaze to stare at that imperial edict, knowing full well that this was the root of all the misfortune in my past life. In my previous life, it was with this very invitation that Qiao Yue stunned the crowd at that Plum Blossom Banquet with her life-saving medical skills, after which her career skyrocketed. Meanwhile, my entire family gradually fell into the web she had woven, until our household was confiscated and our clan exterminated. Lord Wei, this is a verbal decree from His Majesty, Eunuch Li said with a forced smile, his eyes darting menacingly toward the side courtyard. His Majesty has heard that General Wei rescued a remarkable young woman who is well versed in medicine, and has specially summoned her to the palace to demonstrate her skills. My father, Wei Yan, stood with his hands behind his back, his expression so somber it seemed as if water might drip from his face. He did not immediately take the imperial edict. Instead, he turned to look at me, his gaze clearly asking, how are we going to resolve this? I walked forward slowly, avoiding everyone's gaze, and calmly bowed to Eunuch Li. You've come a long way, father-in-law. Thank you for your hard work. My voice was clear, and my tone carried just the right balance of respect and detachment. It is merely that last night, Miss Qiao was testing medicine in the side courtyard when she accidentally ingested some herbs containing hallucinogenic substances. She remains unconscious to this day, and I fear she might disturb your Majesty. Eunuch Li's smile froze for a moment as he narrowed his eyes and looked me over. Oh. Is that so? The Wei family would never dare to tell even the slightest lie. I raised my eyes slightly, my gaze as calm as a still, ancient well, causing Eunuch Li's scrutinizing gaze to falter for a moment. However, although Miss Qiao cannot enter the palace in person, the Wei family has already prepared for you the formula for the miraculous medicine she recently developed, along with those ancient texts. If His Majesty is interested, you may present them all together. With these words, I cut off all her chances of entering the palace. Since she wanted to curry favor with the knowledge she'd gained from time traveling, I would clip the very wings she was most proud of before she even left the Wei residence. Eunuch Li paused for a moment, then finally waved his hand, signaling the eunuch behind him to take the heavy stack of volumes. In that case, I shall return and report back. After seeing off Eunuch Li, the courtyard finally fell silent again. Father turned to face me, his brow furrowed. Zhilan, do you really intend to send these items to the palace? If there truly are any treasonous items among them, the Wei family. Don't worry, Dad. I looked at the remnants of snow on the ground and said calmly, those items have been screened by the estate's apothecaries, and their original formulas have long since been replaced. What's being sent in is nothing more than some laughable street-level tricks. Wei Jinghuan stepped forward at that moment. A hint of complexity had unexpectedly crept into his usually straightforward gaze. Zhilan, how on earth did you find out about the schemes in these books? I didn't answer directly. I simply looked up at the faint, cold light shining through the clearing in the dark clouds on the horizon, my tone steady. Brother, sometimes what you see with your eyes isn't necessarily true. What you hear with your heart might be the truth. Qiao Yue was escorted out by her personal guards. Her face was deathly pale, her hair disheveled, and her once lively eyes were now filled with venom. She stared intently at me, as if trying to read something in my impassive expression. I walked up to her, lowered my voice, and said in a tone only she could hear, "The future you know, it no longer holds any sway in this mansion." Qiao Yue shuddered, and a flash of sheer terror crossed her eyes. The look she gave me was no longer one of seeing me as a stepping stone, but rather as some kind of indescribable threat. After she was taken away from the Wei mansion, the invitation to that plum blossom banquet became my only bargaining chip. My father and brother were seated in the hall as the lamplight flickered. Everyone's gaze was fixed on those few altered medical texts. I slowly rose to my feet and made a request to my father that stunned everyone. I would go to the palace myself to expose Qiao Yue's true nature, in order to protect the entire household. Within the palace walls, red plum blossoms stood out against the snow. That stroke of chilling, vivid crimson resembled the fiery glow that filled the sky when the Wei family's estate was overthrown in a past life, stinging my eyes until they ached. The secret of my rebirth remains locked away in the darkest corner of my heart. At this banquet, where everyone is dressed in fine silk robes and brocades, no one can glimpse the deep wounds within my soul. I am still the legitimate daughter of the Wei family, so proper as to be almost rigid, watching the finale of this final act with a stoic expression. The emperor sat at the head of the table, fingering the volumes I had tampered with, and every now and then let out a few enigmatic chuckles. Is this the medical text written by that renowned physician from the Wei household? His Majesty looked up, his gaze sweeping over his father, who sat stiffly below him, a hint of mockery in his voice. They say it can bring the dead back to life, but why does it all say things like hot pot-based recipes and improved beauty secrets? Can you really call this medical theory? A fine sheen of sweat beaded on Wei Yan's forehead. He immediately rose to his feet and knelt, his voice steady. Your Majesty, that female physician claims to have been trained by a reclusive master. These may be her personal tricks, not orthodox medical practices. The Wei family failed to judge her character properly and nearly allowed these sensationalist, trivial tricks to taint your Majesty's ears. I stood up as well and knelt beside my father, my tone calm yet firm. Your Majesty, ever since Miss Qiao entered the mansion, she has often bewildered people with these outlandish claims. Though she understands only the surface of these matters, her intentions are dishonest. She seeks to curry favor at court, using the Wei family's reputation as a stepping stone, and has even gone so far as to practice witchcraft within the mansion. No sooner had I finished speaking than a commotion broke out in the grand hall. The nobles around me cast all sorts of scrutinizing glances my way, yet no one dared to utter a single word at that moment. Witchcraft. The emperor set down his book, and his gaze grew sharp. Lord Wei, do you know what the punishment is for deceiving the emperor? I dare not. My father bowed deeply. His broad back appeared even more upright in the candlelight. I have already handed Qiao Yue over to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. As for her so-called medical skills, and whether they involve any of the palace's secret medicines, I ask your majesty to investigate this matter thoroughly. I looked up and met the emperor's probing gaze. I did not avert my eyes or flinch. That calm and composed demeanor caused a faint trace of surprise to flicker in his eyes, which had seen it all. The daughter of the Wei family does have some courage. The emperor snorted coldly and tossed the document onto the desk. Since the suspect is already in the Ministry of Justice, conduct a thorough investigation. If the Wei household is truly unrelated to this matter, I will clear your names. But if there is even the slightest connection, your servant is willing to die 10,000 times. My father's voice echoed through the vast hall, without the slightest tremor. After the plum blossom banquet, news spread that Qiao Yue was in prison. Under brutal torture, her shrewdness, a trait she'd brought with her from another world, was laid bare. The Ministry of Justice discovered that the so-called ancient texts she had been carrying were nothing more than rudimentary martial arts tricks, and even included a number of banned hallucinogenic drugs. Instead of becoming a high-ranking consort, she was branded a witch in the eyes of the public and ultimately exiled to the frontier, never to stir up any more trouble for the rest of her life. The crisis at the Wei residence has been completely resolved. As spring warmed the air and flowers bloomed, several new magnolia trees were planted in the Wei family's courtyard. Their blossoms were pure and elegant, just like my state of mind at this moment. After his older brother, Wei Zhilan, finished reviewing Qiao Yue's statement at the Supreme Court, he seemed like a completely different person. When he returned to the mansion, he never brought back any so-called mystical figures again. He sat under the veranda, watching me as I pruned the flower branches, his gaze filled with mixed emotions for quite some time. Zhilan, you've changed. He suddenly spoke, a hint of emotion in his voice. You used to be so hesitant, always afraid of causing trouble for your family. But this time, if you hadn't been one step ahead at every turn, the Wei family would likely have fallen into that woman's hands. I put down the scissors and turned to look at him, a signature, flawless smile playing on his face. Brother, when you've been in the abyss long enough, you naturally learn how to climb out. The abyss? Wei Jinghuan paused slightly, as if trying to read something in my eyes, but I simply turned away and continued pruning that magnolia branch. The heartbreak of a past life, the struggles of this one, it all seemed to fade away like mist, leaving behind only the tranquility that filled the courtyard of the Wei residence. The crisis facing the Wei clan had completely dissipated. My father was carefully maneuvering his way through the imperial court and was growing increasingly influential. Wei Jinghuan, too, was demonstrating his true talent as a military commander through repeated military drills, while I remained the same low-key young lady of the Wei clan, steadfastly propping up this teetering family. Those who once sought to climb the social ladder by exploiting the Wei family now back away 3 paces the moment they see the gates of the Wei residence. I stood on the attic, watching the afterglow of the setting sun bathe the entire capital city. The wind ruffled the hem of my skirt, and that crisp, refreshing scent was invigorating. I don't need to mention that part of the past to anyone, because the one who knows all the secrets has already nipped every potential threat to the family in the bud. In this lifetime, I will personally safeguard the glory of the Wei Manor, forever and ever. The distant, resonant toll of a bell echoed from afar, a sound both solemn and weighty, heralding the end of an era and foreshadowing a new beginning for the Wei household. I simply watched in silence. In that tranquil twilight, I slowly closed my eyes, savoring the hard-won peace and serenity of this life. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.